Hello again. In this video we're going to talk about international law. So what I'd like you to do for a second is pretend you're on the psychologist's couch. Lay back and just free association tell me, what do you think about international law? Are you a lawbreaker? Have you spent any time at a joint? If any of you need to own up to any of your sins, it's confession time at the old-time gospel hour. I promise I won't turn you in. In fact, I'm here to save your soul. So meanwhile, back on the psychiatrist's couch, what kind of laws have you broken? I mean, seriously. Have you done some drugs? Did you drink before it was legal to do so? Have you gone drunk driving? Have you sped? Lawbreakers, all of you, I'm quite sure. So, are you afraid of the state coming to get you? What's wrong with our society? You're lawbreakers. I'm a lawbreaker. Isn't there something wrong with domestic law? Seriously, I think that there's some states where it's still illegal to park your horse in front of some establishments. Am I right? And breaking laws is popularized in American culture as well, isn't it? I mean, hey, you show me a good law, I'll show you a good way to break it. On the other hand, there are some of us who follow laws even if there isn't any way to enforce it. I remember a time when I was in Germany and Austria wandering around Christmas markets, and they had huge tables that were clearly out of sight of the vendor, and no one was even thinking about robbing any of the Christmas ornaments sitting there on the tables. Likewise, most of you may speed, but most of you will never kill. I mean, even if there weren't any laws against killing, most of you probably would never do that anyway. So if most of us, at least a significant portion of us, have broken a law at one time or another, then what good is domestic law? Maybe the object of the game is to deter people somehow, right? Like the death penalty has done a really good job of stopping serial killers from murdering people, right? Good track record on that one. Maybe it has a moral component. It just feels good somehow to have our laws be an articulation of what we think is right and wrong. So maybe it makes us feel good to watch those child molesters and murderers fry. Maybe it's just a social expression of what's acceptable today. I mean, there's a lot of societies where women aren't allowed to go out and show their face in the street. They have to wear veils. Let's face it, our domestic society is very difficult to control. We all break laws at times, yet we also take pride in a strong legal system and a strong rule of law. What's up with that? I'm sure you're saying, hey, wait a second, Mark. I thought you said we were going to talk about international law, not domestic law. Well, we love criticizing international law. I mean, geez, it's so worthless, and there's no way to enforce it, right? It's all gums, no teeth, right? So, what good can international law be, right? Just as domestic law isn't totally worthless, that's a half-empty argument, neither is international. In some ways, international law is similar to domestic law. As we've implied earlier, laws have many purposes. Sometimes they're not just meant to deter criminals. Maybe they're meant to make some sort of a moral statement. Maybe they're to communicate norms in society or to coordinate daily activities. In fact, some laws are simply in existence purely for coordination purposes. International law is different from domestic law in two critical ways. First of all, international law is meant to protect state sovereignty. And secondly, there's no clear enforceable mechanisms in most international law. That is to say, if you're the United States and you invade Iraq, there's no higher power that's going to go and throw you in like international jail or something like that for doing that. George Bush is not going to go to jail necessarily if he's found guilty of torture violations in all likelihood. So under those circumstances, why bother? Well, let me show you a little illustration, and I'll let you decide. To make this illustration, let me introduce two new characters. The first one is Leroy, the lion, and the other one is Seymour. I see more than you think I might see. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, so let's pretend like Leroy and Seymour are major powers in the international system, and give them a few scenarios and see how this plays out. Let's play game number one. In this first game, the object is for Seymour to try to touch the Economist article that Leroy guards, and Leroy's object is to try to prevent Seymour from doing it. Let's see what happens. I'm gonna touch that article. I made it. Well, as you can see, Seymour was successfully able to do so, and there was a lot of conflict. In game number 2, Seymour wants to touch the Economist article that Leroy guards, but Leroy's object is to let Seymour do it. I'm going to touch the Economist article. Is that okay? Okay. And he successfully did so with no major conflict. In the third game, the object is for Seymour to touch the Economist article that is on Leroy's side, and Leroy will touch the Economist article that's on Seymour's side. Looks like they made it.
Now let's take a closer look and see what happened. In the first game, the goals were clearly in conflict. That is, there were two major powers that couldn't agree on anything. In that case, the interests are never going to coincide, and that's not a situation where international law or the United Nations or any major international organization is necessarily going to be the most effective. In the second game, both actors want the same thing. There is no conflict of interest. Therefore, they're going to go forward with very few conflicts anyway, and international law will play a pretty prominent and important role. In the third game, they don't have the same goals, but they may or may not conflict as they cross each other. So to that extent, it's a coordination game, just simply trying to get past each other safely while they are trying to achieve their own goals.
So states obey international law for a few reasons. First, coordination and communication. Think about this. If I were to say, okay, let's drive on the left-hand side of the road in this country in the middle of the night with your lights off, would you tell me, oh, let's not do that because it's illegal? No, I have a feeling it'd be like, dude, you're crazy. Don't do that, right? And so international law isn't always so much for the purposes of punishing somebody. It's for articulating the rules of the road and differences to make sure that, major ships aren't going to wreck into each other, that planes aren't going to crash, that the mail system's going to work the way it's supposed to work. You don't obey it because you're afraid of punishment. You're obeying it because you're afraid of some sort of a major disaster. The second reason why is actual retaliation, that there is a form of deterrence. In international law, there's a standard that suggests that if somebody goes and breaks it, then it is possible for major powers, especially through legitimate channels such as the UN, to go in there and stop the international lawbreaker from doing whatever it is that they're going to do. They can threaten sanctions. In the case of, say, like Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait, you can get together a coalition of states to get together and with the permission of the UN then go in and invade that country and stop them from violating sovereignty in that case. So because international law protects sovereignty, that means that it's going to be somewhat biased toward the most powerful states in the international system, as you might imagine. No one's going to punish the United States for invading Iraq or Afghanistan. No one's going to punish Russia for invading Georgia. However, is that really so different from domestic law, if you think about it? Honestly, how many powerful and celebrity people avoid prosecution or avoid trouble as a result of domestic law favoring the rich and the powerful? We talk about O.J. Simpson, Oliver North, Richard Nixon, and when it really comes down to it, if President Bush and Vice President Cheney at any point in the future are, there's evidence that's found that they are guilty of authorizing torture, do you think they'll ever really end up in federal prison? So think about the comparison between international law and domestic law. Are they really all that different when it comes down to it?